This is not your house anymore, old man. You are just a guest here, and guests do not get to make decisions. My son-in-law said those exact words to me on Thanksgiving night, standing in the kitchen of the house I built with my own hands 31 years ago. He was holding a glass of my bourbon, the good bottle, the one I had been saving since my wife passed. I did not yell. I did not throw him out. I set down the carving knife I was holding, wiped my hand slowly on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, and walked out of the kitchen without saying a single word. What I did next he never saw coming. My name is Leonard. I'm 68 years old, retired after 32 years as a structural engineer for the county. I spent my career calculating load-bearing limits, stress fractures, points of failure. I understood, better than most people, exactly how much weight a structure could absorb before it collapsed completely. And I understood, sitting alone in my truck in the driveway that Thanksgiving night, that my family had been quietly collapsing for years. And I had been too proud, too stubborn, too hopeful to admit it. Let me tell you how we got there. My daughter Melissa is 31 years old. She married her husband Kevin 3 years ago in a ceremony I paid for in full, $42,000. I did not complain. I wrote the check the same way I paid for her college tuition, her first car, the security deposit on her first apartment, because she was my daughter and I loved her, and that is what I believed a father was supposed to do. My wife Linda passed from a stroke 4 years ago. It was sudden. 18 years of a good marriage, and she was gone on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at a routine meeting downtown. That kind of loss changes the geometry of a person. The house felt enormous afterward. The silences felt enormous. When Melissa called 6 months later and said that she and Kevin were struggling financially, that the rent on their apartment across town was becoming impossible, I did not hesitate. I told them to come home. I told them to take the 2 spare bedrooms and stay as long as they needed. I thought having family in the house would help with the silence. Kevin worked in sales. He had an easy confidence about him, the kind that fills a room and makes people nod along without quite knowing why. In the first months, he was charming. He called me sir. He helped me carry groceries. He asked polite questions about my career at the county. But I noticed things, small things, the way an engineer notices hairline cracks. He stopped saying sir somewhere around month 4. He started referring to the house as our place when he was on the phone with his friends. They complained about the water pressure, the old tile in the hall bathroom, the layout of the kitchen. He redecorated the guest room without asking me. Threw out a cedar chest my wife had kept at the foot of the bed for 20 years. When I mentioned it, he looked at me like I had said something mildly embarrassing and told me the chest was too big for the space. Melissa stayed quiet during these moments. That was the part that hurt the most. She would look slightly to the left of my face and change the subject or busy herself with her phone. I kept telling myself she was just trying to keep peace in the marriage. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt that only a father can give. Kevin stopped contributing to household expenses around month 7. At first he had insisted on paying $400 a month toward utilities. That stopped with an explanation about a slow quarter at work. I absorbed the cost. Then the groceries became entirely mine. Then the streaming subscriptions, the landscaping, the replacement cost for the dishwasher that broke and somehow became my emergency to handle. I was retired, living on a pension and modest savings, and I was quietly funding the comfortable lifestyle of 2 adults who were supposed to be getting back on their feet. The Thanksgiving incident did not come out of nowhere. Looking back, I can trace the exact progression, the way I could trace a load path through a failing beam. But that night, standing in my driveway in the cold with my truck engine running and nowhere particular to go, the full weight of the situation settled on me for the first time with absolute clarity. I drove to the IHOP on Route 9 and sat in a corner booth with a cup of coffee until nearly midnight. The waitress refilled my mug 3 times without being asked. She had kind eyes and did not try to make conversation. I was grateful for that. I opened the banking app on my phone somewhere around 10:30, not because I had any specific reason to, but because the conversation with Kevin had shaken loose a vague, uncomfortable instinct I could not name yet. I scrolled through the transaction history on my primary checking account. Nothing unusual. Then I switched to the savings account, the one I rarely touched, the one where I had deposited the proceeds from Linda's life insurance policy 2.5 years ago. The balance was wrong. It should have shown $104,000. Linda's policy had paid out $92,000, and I had added to it over time, carefully, because I had decided that money was not mine to spend. It was meant for our grandson, Melissa and Kevin's son Oliver, who was 5 years old and already showed the same curiosity about how things worked that I had shown at his age. That money was Oliver's college fund. It was the last concrete thing I could do for Linda's memory. It was sacred to me in a way I never said out loud because I did not have the words for it. The screen showed a balance of $9,300. I blinked and looked again. The number did not change. My hands were very still on the table. The diner hummed around me. Somewhere behind me, a family with young children was laughing about something. I felt entirely separate from the room. I forced myself to open the transaction history. There were 2 large withdrawals. The first, for $45,000, had been processed 11 days ago. The second, for $49,700, had cleared 4 days after that. Both listed as wire transfers. Both authorized with what appeared to be my credentials. I did not sleep that night. At 7 in the morning, I was sitting in the parking lot of the office building where my closest friend Frank practiced law. Frank and I had known each other for 37 years. We had coached Little League together when our kids were young. He had stood beside me at Linda's funeral. He was also one of the sharpest real estate and estate planning attorneys in the county, a fact his opposing counsel had learned to regret more times than I could count. He arrived at 7:40, saw me through the glass door before he'd even gotten his coat off, and waved me in without asking any questions. We walked directly into his office, and I told him everything. Not emotionally, methodically. Dates, amounts, the exact wording of what Kevin had said to me the night before, the timeline of behavioral changes I had documented in my head over the past 1.5 years. Frank listened without interrupting. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him, and a pen he did not pick up once during the entire time I spoke. He listened with his whole body. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his computer. He pulled up the county recorder's database and searched my name and home address. It took him less than 4 minutes to find what he was looking for. There was a document filed 22 days ago, a durable financial power of attorney, granting Kevin full authority over my banking accounts, investment accounts, and real property. My signature was on it. I had never signed it. Frank leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, something colder and more focused. He told me that with a valid power of attorney, Kevin had the legal authority to authorize those wire transfers without triggering any automatic fraud alerts at the bank. He told me that we needed to find out exactly where the money went and exactly what else Kevin was planning to do with the authority that document gave him. He started typing. The money had been wired to an escrow account associated with a property transaction. Frank accessed the pending sale records through the county's real estate database. It took him about 20 minutes of searching, cross-referencing Kevin's name against recent filings. He found a pending purchase contract, a 4-unit rental property in a neighboring town, listed at $380,000. The earnest money deposit of nearly $95,000 matched almost exactly what had been taken from Linda's savings. The buyer of record was Kevin. Frank pulled up the full listing details and read the notes attached to the contract. Kevin had submitted a financing application for the balance of the purchase price. The application listed him as a seasoned real estate investor with significant liquid assets, supported by bank records from my account, records he had accessed using the fraudulent power of attorney. The loan was pending approval at a regional credit union. Frank sat back and let me process what I was looking at. Kevin was not in financial trouble. He had never been in financial trouble in the way he had described to Melissa or to me. This was not a man who was barely keeping his head above water. This was a man who had spent the better part of a year positioning himself quietly and patiently to steal my retirement savings and use them as seed money for a rental property investment that would generate income exclusively for himself. He had moved into my home, systematically dismantled my authority within it, isolated my daughter from her loyalty to me, and methodically constructed a legal mechanism to drain the account I had built in my wife's memory. Then he had sat across from me at my own Thanksgiving table and told me I was a guest in my own house. The rage I felt in that moment was very quiet. That is the only way I can describe it. It did not present itself as heat. It was cold. Clear. Absolute. Frank told me we had options. We could go to the police immediately, file a fraud report, and attempt to claw back the money through emergency injunctions. He said we could have Kevin charged with elder financial exploitation, forgery, and wire fraud before the end of the business day. I told him not yet. He looked at me. I told him that if we moved now, Kevin would hire an attorney and claim a family misunderstanding. He would say I had agreed to let him manage my finances due to my age and his financial expertise. He would produce whatever documentation his attorney could muddy the water with, and a county prosecutor facing a full docket might offer him a plea arrangement that amounted to nothing. He would walk out of the process with a fine, maybe probation, and still be married to my daughter, still living in my house, already thinking about the next move. I told Frank I wanted Kevin to commit the full crime. I wanted him to close the property purchase using stolen funds that no longer had the legal authorization behind them. I wanted federal wire fraud, not a family dispute. Frank stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and picked up his pen for the first time since I had started talking. We spent the next hour building the trap. Frank drafted a revocation of the power of attorney. The document was precise, legally airtight, notarized by Frank himself in his capacity as a certified notary, and filed directly through the state's secure attorney filing portal within the hour. The revocation was immediately active and binding. Kevin's fraudulent document was legally dead the moment the state system accepted the filing. But we filed it quietly. There was no notification requirement to the agent named in the original document. Kevin would receive no alert, no letter, no email, no call from any bank or government office. He would continue operating under the assumption that he held absolute authority over my finances, unaware that he was walking forward on a bridge that no longer existed. Frank then contacted a friend of his at the regional FBI field office, a supervisory agent who handled financial crimes. He presented the core facts: the forged document, the wire transfers, the pending property transaction, the fraudulent loan application, and asked about the federal threshold. The agent confirmed what Frank already knew. The moment Kevin signed closing documents using a revoked power of attorney to transfer funds across financial institutions, it would constitute federal wire fraud. The dollar amount far exceeded the threshold for mandatory sentencing guidelines. The agent told Frank to let them know the moment the closing date was confirmed. I drove back to my house that afternoon and performed what was, without question, the most difficult acting of my life. I walked in through the side door. Kevin was on the couch watching football. Melissa was in the kitchen. I said hello to both of them in a voice that conveyed nothing. I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for a while. Kevin appeared in my doorway about 40 minutes later. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, studying me with the cautious assessment of a man checking whether his prey was still subdued. He told me he hoped I was not still upset about the night before. He used a tone of patient condescension, the kind of voice you might use with someone whose feelings you consider an inconvenience. He told me that he and Melissa had been discussing some changes to the household arrangement, and that they wanted to sit down with me over the weekend to talk through some financial planning. He used the phrase "your situation" twice, as though my retirement and my home were a problem he was generously offering to manage. I looked up at him from the edge of my bed and gave him a small, defeated nod. I told him that sounded fine. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back downstairs. I sat in my room and focused on my breathing the way Linda had tried to teach me years ago, when the stress of a difficult project used to keep me awake. In. Out. Slow. 3 days later, I had a phone call from Frank. His contact at the credit union had quietly flagged a loan application after Frank filed an advisory notice through proper legal channels, noting that the supporting bank documents had been obtained through a power of attorney now under legal dispute. The credit union had not rejected the loan outright because we did not want Kevin to know the ground had shifted. But the approval timeline had been extended, giving us a window. Frank had also hired a private investigator, a former county detective named Strickland, who had spent 2 days surveilling Kevin's activity around the rental property and making inquiries about his business associations. Strickland called Frank on a Thursday evening. Frank called me immediately after. Kevin was not acting alone. Strickland had traced the escrow account receiving the stolen funds to an LLC registered 18 months ago. The LLC had 2 members. Kevin was one. The other was a woman named Sandra, who had been Kevin's girlfriend for approximately 2 years, a timeline that overlapped almost entirely with his relationship with Melissa. Sandra was listed as the property manager of record on the rental building. Kevin had structured the investment so that the LLC, which Melissa knew nothing about, would collect all rental income and handle all property-related decisions. Kevin's plan, as Strickland's financial forensics contact had pieced it together, was to use my money to establish the down payment, use the fraudulent loan to close the purchase, collect rental income through the LLC, and at the moment of his choosing, dissolve the marriage and relocate. The rental property would provide him income. My savings would be gone. Melissa and Oliver would be left with nothing. I sat in my truck in a shopping center parking lot and held that information for a very long time. I thought about Oliver, 5 years old, already asking me how bridges stayed up, why buildings did not fall over in the wind. I thought about Linda, and the specific way she had looked at that child the last time she held him, 3 months before the stroke took her. I thought about the cedar chest Kevin had thrown away. I picked up my phone and called Frank. I told him it was time to move. The closing date for the rental property was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Frank contacted the FBI supervisory agent that same evening. The agent requested 1 business day to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and prepare the Financial Crimes Unit for a same-day action. On the Monday before closing, Frank and I sat together in the office of the branch manager at my primary bank, a woman named Patricia who had handled my accounts for 11 years. Frank presented the certified revocation of power of attorney, the state filing confirmation, and a detailed summary of the unauthorized wire transfers. Patricia reviewed the documents with the focused expression of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. She initiated an emergency fraud hold on my accounts and flagged the escrow account associated with Kevin's LLC for federal monitoring. She contacted the bank's compliance division while we were still sitting in her office. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner, pot roast, the same thing I had been making on Monday nights for 20 years. Kevin ate 2 full servings and told me the gravy was good. I thanked him. Melissa put Oliver to bed while Kevin watched television. I washed the dishes and went upstairs. Tuesday morning, Kevin left the house at 8:15 in a sport coat and tie, his leather portfolio under his arm. He looked the way a man looks when he believes he is about to walk into the best day of his life. He did not say goodbye to me. He said he would be home by noon and they would all go out to celebrate. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway. Then I got up, put on my own coat, and drove downtown. Frank was already in the lobby of the title company building when I arrived. Standing beside him were two men in dark overcoats, both carrying federal credentials. The special agent in charge introduced himself briefly, shook my hand once, and told me where to position myself. We took the elevator to the 4th floor and waited in a conference room adjacent to the closing suite. The title company's senior closing officer had been notified by federal authorities that morning. She understood her role. She would allow the closing to begin. She would allow Kevin to sign the documents. The moment he executed the wire instruction that would transfer stolen funds across state lines using a revoked power of attorney, the crime would be complete and irreversible. I sat in that conference room for 40 minutes. Frank sat beside me. Neither of us spoke much. At one point he poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine on the credenza and handed one to me. I held it without drinking it. Then the closing officer knocked twice on the connecting door. We walked in. Kevin was seated at the conference table, his portfolio open in front of him, a pen in his hand. He had clearly just finished signing several documents because the closing officer's assistant was stacking them into a neat pile. He was leaning back in his chair with the loose, comfortable posture of a man at ease, already planning the celebration. He looked up when the door opened. The transformation on his face happened in stages. First confusion when he saw me, then a quick recalibration into something performatively relaxed, as though he was about to offer a smooth explanation. Then he saw Frank. Then he saw the 2 federal agents stepping in behind us. The performance fell apart completely. He pushed back from the table and stood up too fast, knocking his portfolio to the floor. He started talking immediately, loudly, the words coming out in a jumbled rush about a misunderstanding, about family matters, about a simple administrative error at the bank. He pointed at me and said I'd given him full authorization, that I had agreed to everything, that I was confused about the details. One of the agents stepped forward and asked Kevin to sit down. His voice was very calm. Kevin did not sit down. The agent introduced himself by name and title. He informed Kevin that the power of attorney he had filed with the county recorder had been determined to be a forged document, that it had been legally revoked, and that the wire transfers executed under its authority constituted elder financial exploitation and criminal fraud. He stated that the wire instruction Kevin had signed that morning, directing stolen funds across financial institution lines using a revoked legal instrument, met the federal threshold for wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. Kevin's attorney, the one he had apparently called somewhere between panicking and being told to sit down, was not in the room. He had no one. I stood near the door and watched my son-in-law's composure dissolve in real time. It did not give me the satisfaction I might have expected. It gave me something quieter than satisfaction. It gave me the feeling of a structural problem that had finally been properly addressed. Kevin was handcuffed and walked out of the title company on a Tuesday morning in November, past the receptionist who looked carefully at her computer screen as he went by. Frank drove me home. Melissa did not know yet. I had made a deliberate decision not to tell her in advance, for reasons that were practical and also, I will admit, painful. I had not been certain how much she knew. I was still not entirely certain, and I needed the truth to reach her without being filtered through Kevin first. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, still waiting for Kevin to come home with news of the celebration. Oliver was on the living room floor with a set of wooden blocks. He looked up when I came through the door and said, "Hi, Pop." I said hi back. I sat down at the kitchen table across from my daughter. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw my face. I told her everything. I did not spare her the details. The forged document, the stolen money, Linda's savings, the LLC, Sandra, the rental property, the closing that morning, the federal agents. She sat very still through most of it. When I got to the part about Sandra, she put both of her hands flat on a table and stared at them. A long time passed. Oliver kept playing in the other room. I could hear the soft knock of wooden blocks. She asked me if I was certain. I opened my phone and showed her the photographs Strickland had taken. Kevin and Sandra outside the rental building. Kevin and Sandra at a restaurant 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Kevin signing delivery paperwork for furniture being moved into the rental unit. She closed her eyes. What followed was not the kind of crying that makes a lot of noise. It was the quiet kind, which in my experience is always the worst kind. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and cried without moving, without covering her face, the way a person cries when they have been hit with something too large to react to properly. I did not tell her it would be all right. I did not know if it would be. I sat across from her and let her feel what she was feeling without rushing her out of it. After a while, she asked about Oliver. I told her what Frank had already helped me do. The funds remaining in the savings account, the $9,300 that Kevin had not yet touched, had been transferred and secured in a dedicated custodial account under Oliver's name, administered by Frank's office as trustee. I had also contacted my insurance agent and restructured my existing life policy with Oliver as the sole beneficiary, separate from any marital estate. Whatever Kevin's criminal proceedings produced in terms of asset recovery, Frank believed we had a strong case for restitution. Oliver's future was not gone. Melissa looked at me for a long time. Then she said she was sorry. I told her I needed some time before I could respond to that in the way she deserved. I asked her to give me that time. She nodded. She and Oliver stayed in the house till December, while she found an apartment and sorted through the practical devastation Kevin had left behind. We did not talk much during those weeks, but we were not unkind to each other. Oliver helped me rake the leaves in the backyard on a Saturday. He asked me why leaves fell down and not sideways. I told him it had to do with the weight of things, and he thought about that for a while, and then asked if we could have hot chocolate. We had hot chocolate. Kevin was denied bail pending his hearing given the federal charges, the forged document, and the evidence of premeditation the FBI had assembled. Frank had connected us with a federal victims advocate who walked us through the restitution process. The criminal case would take time. These things always do. But the structure of it was sound. On the first morning after Melissa and Oliver moved to their new apartment, I walked through the house slowly. Every room. The kitchen where Linda had taught Melissa to make her mother's cornbread recipe when she was 11, the small office where I had drafted 30 years of engineering reports, the living room where Oliver had sat with his blocks. I came to the kitchen table and sat down in my chair. The chair where I had eaten every meal in this house for 3 decades. The chair Kevin had once told me I should consider giving up for the sake of a more open floor plan. I made a pot of coffee, the good kind, the whole beans I kept in the freezer that Linda had ordered from a small roaster in Vermont every few months. I had not made it since she passed. I ground the beans in the old countertop grinder and listened to the sound of it, which was a sound I had not heard in 4 years. And I stood at the counter while the coffee brewed and let the smell of it fill the kitchen. I poured a cup, sat down. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet when it belongs to you. I had spent 4 years in a fog of grief that I had tried to cure with generosity, inviting the wrong people into the space where the grief lived and hoping the noise of family would fill it correctly. It had not worked. The fog had just thickened. But that morning, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a cup of good coffee and no one telling me what this house was or was not, the fog lifted. I want to say something to anyone listening who recognizes any part of this story. Grief makes us vulnerable in ways we do not always see in ourselves. It makes us want to fill the empty spaces. And sometimes we fill them with the wrong things or the wrong people. And we absorb the cost of that for a very long time because we are afraid that asking for better means we love less. It does not. Protecting what you built, standing in the place that belongs to you and refusing to be moved out of it is not selfishness. It is the work of someone who understands that what they have is worth defending. My wife spent 32 years building a life inside these walls. My grandson's going to have the college education she wanted him to have. And I'm sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee that smells like she is still in the next room. That is enough. That is everything. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Hit the like button if you believe that the people who try to take what is not theirs always, eventually face what they have coming. And subscribe to Story of Dad for more. I have thought a lot about the version of myself that sat in that IHOP booth on Thanksgiving night, staring at a zero balance on a cracked phone screen, trying to decide whether what I was seeing was real. I was 68 years old, retired, alone in a diner on a holiday, and the man I'd welcomed into my home had just finished telling me I was a guest there. That is a particular kind of low. The kind that does not announce itself loudly. It just settles into your chest like cold water and sits there. What I have come to understand, looking back at all of it, is that Kevin did not become what he was because of bad luck or hard circumstances. He became what he was because at every step he made a deliberate choice. He chose to forge a signature. He chose to steal money set aside for a 5-year-old child. He chose to carry on a hidden relationship while my daughter pressed her hands flat on the kitchen table and cried quietly at news that broke her in ways she is still working through. Every single piece of it was a choice, and choices made consistently over time build the structure of a life. His structure was rotten from the foundation, and it collapsed the way rotten structures always do. Not slowly, but all at once in front of everyone. I think about Frank a great deal. 37 years of friendship. And the man opened his office on the day after a federal holiday and did not ask me a single unnecessary question. That kind of loyalty is not luck either. It is also a choice, made over decades of small moments where a person decides whether to show up or not. Frank always showed up. What Kevin never understood, and what I think people like Kevin fundamentally cannot understand, is that the real currency of a life is not money or property. It is the people who will open a door for you at 7 in the morning when everything has gone wrong. I let grief make me careless for a few years. I will say that plainly. After Linda passed, I wanted the house full again. And I did not ask hard enough questions about who I was filling it with. I confused proximity with family, generosity with love, and tolerance with patience. None of those are the same thing. Generosity without discernment is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. And when you make yourself indefinitely vulnerable to the wrong person, you are not being kind. You are being slowly consumed. What pulled me through was not anger, though there was anger. It was the same discipline that got me through 32 years of engineering work. The ability to look at a failing structure without panicking, identify exactly where the break is, and build a repair that holds. I could not afford to react emotionally when the stakes were that high. Oliver's future was sitting in a bank account that Kevin was draining. The time for feeling things was later. The time for precision was right. Then, Oliver asked me recently why some bridges last 100 years and some fall down. I told him that the ones that last were built by people who did not cut corners, who checked their work, and who respected the weight they were responsible for carrying. He thought about that for a second and then asked if we could have hot chocolate. We had hot chocolate. We had hot chocolate. That is enough for me. That is genuinely everything.